météo.
D'accord. Bonjour Esther.
Makai, if you could get rid of that meeting being live stream thing. Thank you so much.
Ah oui, c'est ça qu'on disait. TV5.
La mort de Guy Lafleur. Ah non.
All right, welcome in everybody. Just take a few seconds to allow people to connect here. We just hit 2 o'clock. Alors, bonjour et bienvenue tout le monde. On behalf of all of us behind the scenes here at Fourth Space, welcome everyone in person and via Zoom to a conversation between Olivier Boudreau and Didier Morelli, organized by our friends at Optica. We are coming to you live from Concordia University's Fourth Space, located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. As caretakers for the lands and waters that we are meeting on today, we are grateful to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their teachings about the earth and our relations. À l'espace 4, toutes nos activités sont ouvertes au public dans le but de faciliter des expériences interactives liées aux travaux de nos professeurs, étudiants et leurs collaborateurs. It's therefore our pleasure to welcome our speakers and audience members in today for this conversation. So I'll quickly mention that those of you joining us in the space, if we have time to take some questions, I'll remind you to please just raise a hand and we'll get a mic to you so that the folks on Zoom can hear you. Those of you on Zoom, welcome in that space. We are in a webinar, but you can still speak. So if you do want to join the conversation, you can also raise a virtual hand and we'll go ahead and unmute you. Otherwise, the Q&A is activated. If you're more of a texter and want to put some thoughts or feedback or comments in the Q&A or the chat, we'll be paying attention to that. We are live streaming to YouTube, and I'll put that into the chat in just a second. And on that note, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Marie-Josée Lafortune. Over to you.
Many thanks, Hannah. I would like to thank you to host this event and also all the whole team of Fourth Space. Thank you to Karit Vamestad, who was the administrative assistant, and Douglas Moffat for the technical tech, and also the person who is the cameraman today. This discussion is part of a series of talks on contemporary art held by Optica, featuring artists, curators, writers, educators, and academics. Since 1972, Optica strives to promote Canadian contemporary art, as well as sensitive, diverse audiences to the issue underlying visual arts discourses and practice through a varied program of exhibition along with critical and educational activities. I would like just to introduce briefly our guest speaker today. Olivier Boudreau is interested in our ability to read and experience the real. The experiences offered in her films, video installation, and performances engage spectators' perceptual capacities and invite them to go beyond the obvious. Her works have been widely shown in Canada, notably at the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, the Vancouver Contemporary Art Gallery, as well as abroad at the Frénois, France, and the Casino, Luxembourg. Her short films have been screened at many major festivals, the Toronto International Film Festival, the International Kurz Film Stage Oberhausen, Germany, SIFF Seattle, United States, and the Stockholm Film Festival. Didier Morelli is a performance artist and art historian, critics, and curator with a PhD in performance studies from Northwestern University, Chicago. He's also associate editor at Espace Art Actuel. His writing has been published in Art Journal, Canadian Theatre Review, C Magazine, Border Crossing, SR and Opinions, Performer Magazine, Spiral, and the Drama Review, among others publications. So I will let you introduce this discussion in between Olivia.
Thank you. Merci. I did a really strange thing. I prepared for this conversation in French.
Oh!
which is unusual because I am more comfortable in English, but then Olivia and I have only interacted in French. So now I have a bunch of French questions and I'd like set myself up with French terminology.
That's perfect because I'm quite creative with English.
With English, so
we'll
it's excellent.
even it out.
It can be a fluid conversation. This has
Exactly.
never happened to me before, so this is like a first time it's gone this way. But that's great. I'm better at improvising in English, so we can complement each other in that way. So I thought, of course, we're here today in large part to talk about the project you just had at Optica, which I wrote a text for, the project entitled Gilbert. Exhibition came down a couple of weeks ago, but before we did that, I thought we would take some time to maybe lead up to that with a few previous works that you and I have discussed,
Yes.
to kind of give some context for that project and some context for where you are right now in your career and in your practice. So one of the basic things that I thought would begin for is that for people who don't know your work or aren't familiar with your practice or your parcours in general, if you could give us a sense of where you studied, where you come from,
Yes.
and how you've gotten to this practice that mixes installation, video, film, and live performance.
Yes. So I started out as a dancer, and I started my studies in dance, and then I dropped out. And then I started in a program in cinema, and I dropped out. And then I was like, oh God, what I am going to do, and I ended up in art. I think mainly because I could do whatever I wanted there. It was a very free space. So I did my baccalaureate and master at l'UQAM, where I started as a painter, but then very quickly, I wasn't such a great painter anyway, but very quickly move on to video installation. So I think that because I came from dance, movement was very important to me. That's why I was probably a bad painter. And the first installation that I did was this very simple exploration of how the body moves in a frame, and how can I create atmosphere and movement in a way that could shift my perception, but very, very slowly, in order to grasp every little detail. So that was the beginning of the practice. And then I added up sound, and then editing, and then 2 screens projection, and then that's how it went. Voilà. Is that enough?
Yeah, no, that's great. It's
Okay.
so you bring up Salle C, I think is that what you're describing, or is that another project you were talking about there?
I was talking about all the projects.
All the projects. No. I mean, when you said the first video or the first work you made, was that what you were talking about?
But that's a funny way to put it, because it was a performance, but it was filmed.
Yes.
And then I stopped performing, and I kept the video installation.
So let's describe it, because I didn't tell you. I sent you a list of things I wanted to talk about, but then I've added this to it because I was like very excited about it. So now that you've kind of described it, so let's describe it. The project's called Salle C. It was made in 2007. It's the first project on your website, which I always feels like is a clear marker of something that you're like.
Right.
It's the bottom item there. And for me, you would clearly start seeing the relationship between the body and the camera and framing.
Yes.
So the performance is, if I understand correctly, it's a camera shot of 15 hours of video of you sitting on a bench from behind.
Yes.
Being recorded continuously, and each time the cassette runs out, it's cataloged on a wall.
Yes. So I was on the bench every hour of the open hour of the gallery. It was right there at Dina Hélène. And so it was either 6 or 5 hours a day. And each hour I had to change the tapes because it was tapes then, which is quite exotic.
Yeah.
So, and it was literally my bottom on the bench. It was a very, very close-up image of I'm sit there. So this is I've done other things before, but you're right. It's quite interesting to see it as the first. Everything is there.
Yeah.
Let's say everything is there.
Right, because there's like framing, there's endurance, there's
Yes.
a performer, you as the performer, and then there's the whole notions of documentation and
Yes.
what is the life of that object. So, I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up because that's something I wanted to ask you about, like 15 years later, like what it feels like to look back on that project.
15 years later. It was a very, you know, I learned that not every spectator is like me because I'm a very well-behaved spectator. Like I don't try to cross the limits or like provoke anything. I'm a very, I follow the rules. And yeah, there was, my God, spectators had so many ideas of how to interact with the piece, like talking to me, sitting next to me, touching me, like touching the tapes, touching the camera, changing. It was a very, very intense experience, and it was a whole 5 weeks of my life. Basically, I was there, and it was super interesting in terms of what people expect from a work. What do they want, and where can we meet, but also what is the limit of this encounter? Like, it was very formative, and I've not done anything like that since. I don't know if I would. It was quite intense.
So now, as an object, it exists in your archive as a series of cassette tapes.
Yes, it's here in the collection of Dina Hélène. There's these shelves, like this furniture with all the tapes and video capture, also digital capture of all this.
And it hasn't been re-exhibited, has it? It just exists as a...
Was it? Non, je pense pas. No.
Great. I'm glad we talked about that. So we'll jump a few years forward to something that you and I talked about discussing, which is L'Étuve from 2011, a color video, 20 minutes. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because that's probably the first time that I'm conscious of having seen your work. I might have seen it before, but that was it for me at the Québec Triennale at the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal. And I really remember, it's one of the only pieces I remember from that because I had such a transcendent experience and relationship to it. That effect, you know, 2011. I was going to say, like, I was young, but I wasn't that young. So it's not like I was 10 years ago. But I just remember having this experience of walking into an installation, of feeling immersed in it, of having that feeling of both looking at live performance, but also looking at what is deeply affecting in cinematography and video and sound, which can reach sometimes further than live performance, and seeing those two things together. So some of the things I want to talk to you about that video, maybe actually we should look at a little bit at it and then we'll talk about it. So we have a little excerpt so we can see it.
I'm going to share my screen.
Yes.
Hope for the best. Okay. I could fast forward, but I think I won't.
No. Yeah, no, I think it's...
Do people hear me when I talk now? Or, yeah? In the Zoom, do they hear me? Yes? Excellent. So if you want to talk over, we could.
So I want to get the sound when it comes through because it's such an amazing release. But can you describe the installation also, like how this video was meant to be experienced?
Yes, it was very well presented at the Triennale. It was the best presentation of this work. It was a whole room dedicated to it. It was a very big projection. I'd say maybe 14 feet high, and yeah, the room was made for the projection. So the wall was square. There was carpet. It was very smooth and cozy. And it's a single frame, I don't know, of a steam bath, and actually right now we can see a character like slowly appearing.
Yeah, there's one of the first characters appearing in the silhouette. You described the setting. I think that's one of the things I wanted to talk about this video for in leading up to Gépard is the importance of the installation as a cocoon or as a kind of environment. And so this is something that I've felt in your work in the past, and I'm wondering where that comes from, what the intention is for this kind of visual, but also acoustic and like textural and like, you know, kinesthetic. I think you're just, you know, your background as a dancer, cinematographer, but like, what is that impetus to create these environments that are so comforting or disturbing or like, you know?
I think it's a very natural like drive to just put one work in a room. Like, if I'm very basic, anyway, I create one work at a time. I'm not on 1,000 of projects. I'm a very like slow-paced creator, one piece after the other, and when it's done, then I present it. And I presented this piece and all the pieces in very different contexts, and I'm always curious about saying, I'm always curious about how a work can be shown in a specific space, and it's always different. And I don't mind like changing the route each time, but my natural drive will always be to put a single piece in a single room, and it's because I like, as a spectator, to have this intimacy with a piece, like a kind of one-on-one relation, and it's also a way to control the atmosphere, the rhythm. Yes, it's something that I don't think about. It's very natural.
And it changes with each project. It changes with the nature of each video.
Yes, they all have their, I don't know, I like to find the size, it depends, like in Optica I had these 2 screens, and I first had an idea of how I wanted to show it, but it couldn't work, so I had to find another way, and I like to be specific about sizes and setups. But as I say, a different room, a different way to show it, and I don't mind that.
So there's a marriage of pre-shot video, post-production, and in situ installation that happens in the kind of like a coexistence of those 2 things.
Yes.
You don't make the work for the space, you make the work and then the work changes in function of the space afterwards.
Yes.
This video also allows us to talk a little bit about content-wise about performers and working with performers. So the first work we were talking about, you are the performer, you place yourself behind the camera, but here we have a bit more of a, and here as the clouds are, the mist is coming up, we see that there's now 2 extra performers in this space.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear more about this transition, this movement towards working with actors or performers or just, you know, public or other people. And, you know, in this space, we can talk about intergenerationality and women and intimate spaces, but I'm just really curious at the base level of like performers directing or collaborating, what that means for you.
Yes. I always, even now that I work with actors, I always choose people for their, I'll say, vibe.
Affect.
Yeah, I don't know, the energy they carry within them. So I don't want to change that. And it's a pleasure to work with people I know, because I know how they are and how they will react in some, I don't know everything, there's always surprises, but I know if I put this person in this situation, I can have an idea of what will appear, and I want people to believe that. I think everybody's better when we are ourselves, even actors, and then to be comfortable. So I would choose the core energy. I choose them for that, and for the desire, because my projects are sometimes difficult to hold or typically demanding, and so if they have desire to put themselves in this situation, it's great, good space. And at the beginning, I was choosing like people I knew, and after that, I had to do like longer performances where I had to find like 20 people, so then it wasn't necessarily people I knew. And then I started to work with text, and when I started to use text, I felt that I had to work with actors, with professionals, because I don't know, because why? That's a question. I don't know, it was very natural, because I wanted people that understood deeply the work, and the people that would be conscious of the way that words goes through the body. So actors are incredible for that. Their bodies literally, thank you, transformed by the text, and it's an amazing process for me. It's very impressive.
I think we can return to that when we look at Gépard and talk about it, because you and I talked about that, how amazing they are with their delivery, because it's phenomenal the way that they present that. So let's put a pin on that and get back to that question of learning lines and speaking them. I'm also interested in this idea of in working with performers and different performers, the evolution of the score, like the evolution of the script, or in this kind of context here, you're working more with a script potentially, with a loose score, with the kind of directing.
With Litsu, it's everything is directed.
Right.
It's like every little movement, like touch your hair, like change position.
So it's rehearsed beforehand and then filmed? It's
rehearsed, but then when we shot Litsu, I was behind the camera, and I was telling them like everything, like touch the towel, and it was kind of magical, because they were it was very little direction, like little move, like turn your head and everything, but they were so trustful in a way, because they embraced all my direction without even looking at the camera, and it was a great experience with. But it was a confronting experience to see how it looks natural, even though I knew everything was asked for. But that's the magic or perversity of this kind of work.
I think there's a really nice tension between live, what is live and performance, or choreography or dance, or the piece that we talked about from the Ellen in terms of like the unpredictability of an audience, and what is live here, what appears to be live but might not be live, or what might be staged. I think there's always a tension in your work around those things as to like what is real, what is unreal, what does it even mean to something to be in this event. In this video, I think we also talk about talk about the choice in terms of people you work with and you're comfortable in anything else, but also like I think you're doing a great challenge for videos and particularly women like body type in desire was created when really much through rhythm of a certain age in the back space going back and forth repeatedly and consistently each other. But I'm also wondering if there's actors in
Yes, everybody brings something with them. Everything, like there's always a possibility of symbolic or yeah, I try to again, it's a very natural process. Like I'm interested in different kind of energy, so it brings different kind of people to me also. And I do it, obviously I do it like consciously, mix different kind of people. But it was also a way to, I think, to get out of myself because I started with me performing. At some point, I wanted something very different. So not a 20-something woman. Like, what would it be like? And yeah, still there's many women in my work. There are some men also sometimes.
I think also this video allows us to talk about anything that'll be important when we talk about Gilbert, but is about cadence and rhythm, and that kind of like almost again towards the cinema and performance, but about creating a rhythm. Here I'm specifically thinking about the rhythm of the mist, the steam coming in, and the way that you build that very differently in each video. It's kind of, there's a apparent rhythm and then there's an underlying rhythm. You know, and I feel like there's a lot of driving forces about that. And so I'm curious about how important rhythm is, both as a dancer who thinks about body and space, but also as a cinematographer who's thinking about montage and sound and video and layering.
It's super important. I work the sound a lot, even in the short films, and in the installation, like the sound has a rhythm. Different performer has their own rhythm. What else can add rhythm? The mist here can add rhythm. Sometimes it's wind. Sometimes it's. I'm always looking to form. I try to do complex. I don't think I do complex, but how it can be more complex. How can I add a layer in this system? Because the more the layer, the more there's layers, the more it feels like alive. Like the piece itself, the work can have its own metabolism. And it's also a way to create atmosphere, because I think atmosphere comes out of rhythm, like what's happening and how there's a disruption in what's happening and how we react to these disruption. And so it's very clear in this work, because all the women, they establish a rhythm, and the mist as its own, and visually, but then also the sound is quicker. The steam goes out slower. There are little movement from the bodies, so that's a good example of those layers that I try to add up to work.
One of the other elements that you bring up is you said atmosphere, but you think about color palette.
Yes.
Coloring the scene, I think that's totally different. These videos also very interesting. I get told that they're warm, and this one has like very blue, and it really is this kind of long film. And it's gray, and regardless of the kind of so I guess that also that color definition.
Yes, but I mean, this is more concentrated. intensive,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I don't plan for calories, they just come up. And each time I'm amazed, like, oh, I did a blue thing, oh, I did a red thing, oh, now I'm in my pink phase. And it's always a surprise.
It's the repressed painting.
I guess that's it.
It's the color palette. It's the mix of the cinema and the repressed painting.
Exactly.
Great. Well, let's. Now we've almost seen the video through. So let's go to the next. Let's go to the next work. So 7 years later, 2018, I wanted to, before we get to J'ai Peur, return to talking about more performative work or more spatial, traditional choreographic work, I guess, closer to what you're talking about. So Corps Aveugle, Corps Voyant is a performance that you presented in Moncton, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
In New Brunswick and in Luxembourg.
Yes.
And the performance is quite basic. There's two performers. You're one of them in one case. I don't know if you performed in both iterations of it.
No, in
Moncton.
At Moncton, there was several performers.
Right?
Yes, I haven't done it.
Okay, yeah, and so it's a score where one person is blindfolded and moves around a gallery, and the other person watches them, bears witness to them, or oversees them, and then they switch, and then the other person navigates the gallery.
Yes. I'd say that the person is following them.
Following them, yes, that's the word you use. And these are exhibitions that are it's gallery spaces. It's not your work necessarily in the space. They're just navigating a gallery space during an exhibition. So I wanted to bring this work up. Do you want to show some images of it?
I will.
With some documentation. Yes.
Je le fais pas correct.
I'll let you focus on.
Knowledge. Partager l'écran.
Here we go. So this is you in Luxembourg.
Yes.
And the performer
Jorge.
Who's blindfolded.
Yes.
So I guess one of the things I want to talk to you about with this, we've kind of touched on it, but is the real and the unreal. Of the event with a camera or without a camera, repetition, repetition as in répétition, so like rehearsal and practice, and the kind of like relational and unpredictability of these circumstances versus the more stage-directed work as we were looking at it too. So, like, how do these works exist side by side to each other in your creative process, in your everyday, in your conceptual world? Because they feel different, and they're probably also not, but yeah.
Yes. This performance is like one I did after I've done another one that was called Standing Bodies, Lying Bodies, with two performers. And when I did Standing Bodies, Lying Bodies, I needed like the low key of performance, like no cameras, no rentals of sound tech stuff, and no post-production, and no cost, and I wanted something very low key. I needed to go back to this kind of setup. And after that, and still, I was amazed at what we could do with just two bodies. So Corps Aveugle, Corps Voyant was a kind of follow-up, and I'm dreaming about doing others, like those two performer score. And I don't know how I could relate them in it's just a lighter work that offer me the possibility to create images, and but with the simple tools, like just two people. For this one in particular, so just to explain a little bit, so there's always a performer that is blindfolded and a performer that followed. And when, if I remember well, when he feels that it's time to switch role, he would stop and take off the blindfold, and then come to the other performer to blindfold the other performer. I don't know if I'm clear here. And then it goes on. And the direction that I give to the performer blindfolded is to navigate the space of the gallery using sound and to experience the gallery that way. And the other one has to follow like maybe at 2 or 3 meters. And the role of the follower is very ambiguous because it changes depending of the moment, the angle, the performer, because he's there to carry, but he also embody a certain following type. I don't know if, so there's something, but it's a very interesting collaboration, even when in standing bodies, lying bodies, like how two people have to live inside the performance for a long time. They became very aware one of the other and they take care one of the other. And this is a very stimulating collaboration. So I'm going to show you a different context as well. I don't have another context. I think I do. I'm off script now. I'm going to show you something else. This one. So I see, so this is Moncton with 2 people. And it's, for the performer, it's the experience to be together in a space for a long time and to navigate together this situation. So it's quite dark. Ah non, on le voit pas, on le voit pas.
It's still,
Non, excuse-moi.
no, it's okay.
Arrêtez de partager, There we are.
Oh yeah.
So, est-ce qu'on le voit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this case, you're not
No.
performing.
It's 2 other performers.
And the exhibition is a different
Yes.
exhibition. It's a different
Yes.
context entirely.
Yes. And I think for the spectator, the way I see it, it's kind of a privilege to be with the performer, like for as long as you want, and without having to be solicited as a spectator would normally be. You can just be with them. And it's a very basic thing, but I'm still fascinated by it.
How you talked to you I don't know, this is not the exact word you used, but you said prise de vue or framing or positioning. You use some kind of a terminology to think about how these actions allow you to create these kind of like situations, like visual situations and context. And so I'm curious to like hear you talk a bit more about again how these are both spectator events, but also for you to create the tableau or the kind of like scenarios, and how that factors into like the overall, I guess, arc of the work in terms of the documentation. There is not it's you didn't frame the documentation,
No.
right? So what you're interested in is in the experience of the spectator who's experiencing a perspective of the work.
Yes.
So there's kind of like a moving framing device going on with you, you the performer and the spectator.
Yes, and it's like depending on the performer, like because it's just 2 bodies doing an action, depending on who would be the performing this particular day, and how many spectators there's in the room. There's always different tableaux created by it. Like if there's one that is blindfolded and another one behind, and then there's a spectator. So then now there are 2 behind the performer, and it's always like the space of the frame is still there in a way, because I'm still creating meaning out of, there's all those possible scenarios emerging from the setup. From a very basic setup. I like that.
There's I can't think of who, but their name, but there's a theoretician in performance studies who talks about performance as an act of bearing witness to something. And it doesn't have to be like bearing witness as a generous act. So as a member of the audience, you're bearing witness to an act. And so what this work really strikes me as a kind of like a multiplication of bearing witness to like someone who's moving around in a vulnerable position or in a blindfolded, who becomes a locust for multiple bearing witness, for kind of like communing around that gesture. I think this work also allows us, again, leading up to J'ai Peur, to think about fear, not knowing, vulnerability. It's very literal here because someone is blindfolded and is asked to navigate its space, but I think it's also like hidden in other levels of the work, and the type of kind of like bearing witness, trusting people to look at you, trusting an audience to respect the space, to respect the environment. So, and I think, you talked about it from Satisy in terms of like trust, fear, putting your body in a very vulnerable space visually by highlighting your lower back, but also by having people come touch you or speak to you. So where is this element of vulnerability, of not knowing, of the unknown, of the intimate and the kind of dangerous space that can be, or the wholesome space, the kind of supportive space that can be? Where does that manifest itself throughout the different works?
Everywhere. It's and it was the main difficulty when I stopped performing, because I knew I would have ask people to do it. And I was very careful when I did it, like who's gonna do it, what will be the circumstances, are they well prepared, and it's always, it's very tricky, because even when people want to do a long duration performance, when they're inside it, then they realize how difficult it is. So it's always difficult to work with them and to prepare them. And it's all about I feel like I'm dealing with their vulnerabilities and mine as well, and it's a very delicate matter. So it's always there at some level. Anyway, if you work with people to create a work of art, there's vulnerabilities, and it has to be managed. It's not something you can ignore. And it's in the work, because I'm interested in this deep, wild part of us in a way, and it's in every piece, I think, even the more composed one.
It does feel to me though that like it's approached in a way that it becomes intention, and it's not overwhelming. It's not, or if it is overwhelming, it creeps up on you. And I will talk about this maybe in J'ai Peur again, but it's just like it's always on the cusp of, it's always on the verge of being uncomfortable, but never quite fully uncomfortable enough to drive you out of the space, it kind of lures you in a way that allows you to sit with it until you're too deep to wonder whether or not you want to.
I'd say some people are
driven away by it from the beginning.
I'd say it's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. Okay.
No, I got that. Like Satisy was clear.
Yes,
not for everybody.
Not for everybody. Great. Well, let's talk about J'ai Peur then. Let's go on to that. Why don't we, instead of talking about it, let's watch, because it's so important to do a little bit of watching.
I think first I'll show the women.
Wait.
And then I'll show the car.
Yeah.
And I'll try to keep the sound when I'll show the car.
Cool.
I don't know if it's possible.
And then we'll look at maybe some images of the installation, or we'll describe the installation.
Oh yes, the video. Yeah. I haven't prepared for that.
We have a little bit of a video of the installation, but if we don't, it's fine. We can describe it too. And
I totally forget it. I will find it. So it's a two-screen installation. So this is the first. This is the smallest projection.
In the front.
J'ai peur de me laver. J'ai peur des démangeaisons.
J'ai peur des insectes qui piquent.
J'ai peur de l'aigreur.
J'ai peur du noir.
J'ai peur du bruit.
J'ai peur des hauteurs.
J'ai peur des courants d'air.
J'ai peur de ce que je respire.
J'ai peur des espaces ouverts en hauteur.
J'ai peur de la folie.
J'ai peur de la douleur.
J'ai peur de quitter un lieu sûr.
J'ai peur des abus sexuels.
J'ai peur des animaux sauvages.
J'ai peur des rues.
J'ai peur de traverser les rues.
J'ai peur des aiguilles.
J'ai peur des objets pointus.
J'ai peur des chats.
J'ai peur des maladies du foie.
J'ai peur de l'ail.
J'ai peur des opinions.
J'ai peur de la poussière.
J'ai peur de rouler en voiture.
J'ai peur de marcher.
J'ai peur de l'amnésie.
J'ai peur des éraflures.
J'ai peur d'être griffé.
J'ai peur de regarder vers...
So this goes on for 30 minutes.
Yes. Okay, and then I'll do a little. Je vais essayer de faire une petite présentation. Comme ça, je vais essayer de faire ça.
J'ai peur du vent.
J'ai peur des hommes.
Faire ça. Ah, ça marchera pas. On n'aura pas le son et le.
So yeah, so as, if you can imagine that as this text is running on, there's also this video, floor to ceiling
Yes.
at the front of the space. There we go.
So I have to stop this. Bon. Here it is. Est-ce que tu peux l'écran? Oui. So it's a very basic shot that we all know, like a car in the road at night. Puis je vais retrouver la vidéo.
And so this, so the sound of the droning car and the sound of the actors saying kind of inhabits the space as
Yes.
you see this coming in.
Yes.
This is floor to ceiling, and the actresses are in a smaller projection at the back of the room.
Yes, they're like 4 feet wide.
Right.
At the back.
At the back. And the room is pitch black, and there's no other rabais or anything.
Je vais chercher la prise de l'installation.
Sure. What we also have is a tiny video made by the team at Optica that shows.
Je vais le retrouver ici. Bon, excusez le. Ah, il est là, ok. Voilà. Ok, ça c'est ouvert. Je retourne ici. Partager.
J'ai peur de la lèpre.
J'ai peur du blanc.
J'ai peur des chaussons à gauche.
J'ai peur du bruit trop fort.
J'ai peur des tornades.
J'ai peur des ouragans.
J'ai peur des lacs.
J'ai peur des ficelles.
J'ai peur des poursuites judiciaires.
J'ai peur de l'accouchement.
J'ai peur du sens des mots.
J'ai peur de la syphilis.
J'ai peur des loutres.
J'ai peur de l'obscurité.
J'ai peur de devenir folle. J'ai peur des longues attentes. J'ai peur de cuisiner. J'ai peur des préliminaires. J'ai peur d'être punie. J'ai peur des machines. J'ai peur de perdre mon érection. J'ai peur des grandes choses. J'ai peur de la couleur noire. J'ai peur de la musique. J'ai peur des maladies du cerveau. J'ai peur des menstruations. J'ai peur qu'on m'attache. J'ai peur du métal. J'ai peur du changement. J'ai peur des météores. J'ai peur de l'alcool. J'ai peur de la poésie. J'ai peur des petites choses. J'ai peur d'être contaminée. J'ai peur des souvenirs. J'ai peur.
All right, let's talk a bit about where they come from, and then we can. So yes, tell us where the score comes from and the idea, and
Yes.
give us a little more context for the
Yes.
entire piece.
So, as I told you before, I ended up on looking for a list of phobias, and I found this inventory of like 500 phobias, and I realized that each time like there's a recurring phobia, researcher and doctors had to create a new word, adding the Latin suffix phobia. So xenophobia, zoophobia, etc. But I didn't know there was 500, of course. And when I found this incredible list of phobias, it was amazing. It was troubling in a way because all those new terms were reflecting on new possible diagnosis, and it was a very vertiginous thought that like there was so many phobias, so many people having these obsession, I will put like or trouble, or and it had the effect on me of like the opposite effect. In a way, I realized that I had many of them, maybe like 50 of them, and at the end I couldn't grasp them because they were always replaced by a new one, by another one. I also have that, and I also have that, and then at some point I thought, okay, maybe it's just being human. Maybe we're just human, everybody, and it was it was a very poetic text as well because it's on a website. Someone is doing this work of cataloging those phobia, and you have like the word and agoraphobia, and then you have a very short description, and in the words themselves, in the order, the alphabetical order, and in the short description, there are kind of poetry emerging as well, because they're sometimes very close in terms of meaning because of the Latin base, and sometimes very far apart because suddenly we switch, and yeah, so I wanted to do something with that, of course, and I felt that it had to be like reflecting the possibility of fear, the reality of fear, but I wanted to reflect as well this non-stop movement of fear replaced by a new one, by another one, by something else. So we cannot hold on to those fear, what is phobia is about, like it's a trauma, so it's something that we cannot let go. And that's how I had the idea first of the two character, I wanted the intimacy, like the feeling I had of sharing all those fear with so many people. I wanted to reflect the piece to reflect that as well. So I wanted a very intimate relation between two characters. And then I wanted movement, and I had like few ideas, and I ended up shooting the car scene. Yeah, so that's how it came up.
So the score is intact from the internet website in terms of the alphabetical list of phobias.
Yes.
Which is not obvious necessarily anywhere in the description of the piece or in the presence of the piece. It really is, because you're not using the Latin term, you're really using what the fear is itself.
Yes. I introduced every fear and in the first
person.
In the first person.
Aye.
So we can. Some people think they're improvising, but they're respecting the alphabetical order of the list of the phobia. So it's really a performance in the sense that they had to follow a certain score, and also there's this irrational aspect, because it was a very long list, so it lasts for half an hour, and they did it.
And there's an act of translation also going on, because you moved the text out of English into French. So even some fears probably become distorted or changed because of
a little bit, yes.
Because you had to make decisions on what is the word and how does that word become changed. So there's
yes. And also sometimes like one term could refer to different fears with little nuances, and I would like add them all because they're all interesting.
I mean, this is why I want to talk about working with actresses and working with script.
Yes.
Let's talk about the actresses in this case, because you and I talked about them. You were just blown away by them, and I think they're superb, and just in the way that they deliver. But there's this amazing deadpan, very level, almost no recognition of the other, but at the same time, it's very intimate. Like it's almost as though they're just
inhibited.
And so talk to us a little bit about working with these actresses, in terms of having script and what you are able to produce in that directing position in the back of a car to create that kind of atmosphere again, kind of setting.
Yes. I'm very, very proud of the actress and the work we did, because I think it's one of the, because working with actors and text, it's an imperfect process, and this is why it's so attractive to me. It's because we have to communicate the more we can. We have to to feel that we understand each other. But at some point, when it's in their hands, it's not what I had in mind. It's never what I have in mind. And there's something about it that still stimulates me. I want to go back there, because I don't know, I like this impossible perfection, and the fact that it's out of my hands at some point. But with them, they're just so right on. It was very interesting. They knew the text. We had to find the good vibe. They were very professional, and we found this state of mind that they had to keep. So when we were able to name the state of mind, and when we added to that like a little bit of body language, like they have this movement, it's like waves and they go back to one another, and I think that's how everything find its place. This movement, like they can rely on that, and they have the right state of mind, and then they have the text. So, and it was, I don't know, I think even then when we started, we didn't know if they would be able to go through the text. And when they did it, when it was Zoophobia, the last one, and we were in the car, and we waited, it was very silencieux, quiet, and there was the sound man with me in the front of the car, and like for a minute, and then when we topped the car. We were like, "Ah!" Like incredible. They did it just so perfectly, and it was beautiful to be in the car with them.
Yeah, when we talked about it the first time, I asked you about the car and the atmosphere, and so you rented a Lincoln,
Yes.
and then you drove it through the Eastern Townships on
Yes.
an unobstructed road, because you can't see it here, but basically in the 30 minutes, the car doesn't stop. It's
No.
this endless car ride through country
Yes.
roads at night, and so, yeah, how was that process, that bringing together of these elements, which are so in movement,
Yes.
so uncertain, and yet like seem to have cocooned again really well.
I think that's what we like about performance. We don't know if it's gonna work, and that's how. Yeah, even though when I was in the car, like before starting the car, I was like, well, we don't know. Maybe it's not gonna work.
Because you had rented it for a couple of hours, right? This is what you had said. You had like
it was a one night
thing, right?
Yeah.
It's got all happen.
And I felt that the actresses had probably the energy of doing it twice, but probably not for a third time. So I was like, okay, we'll do it twice, and then that's it. We'll have what we have. And yeah, so it was also a great. It was a different experience in the piece. It was something else, like to be with them. And yeah, that's it. I don't know what to say more.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great. I think we're almost on time. Oh, we are on time. I have a question for you, which is totally anecdotal, but we'll open up to the people after, the audience. Is the costume that's in there the same one that's in Pelage?
No, but it looks so
identical.
alike. I know.
I've been looking for like Easter eggs in all these performances to create links between them. But they in this performance from 207, you have this, because you and I have talked a lot about how what's great about the piece is also the Lincoln and then the fur jackets, which just have this insonorité, this kind of like, insulating quality that I think adds really to the piece.
Comfort.
The comfort. And so when I was going to the website and looking, I was like, oh, is that the same one? But
it's almost alike.
It's almost alike.
It's almost alike. I don't have the other one because it was falling apart, like it
got
was an old thing, rabbit skin, but it's also rabbit, and it looks almost the same.
So I wanted to ask you more generally, and we will open up to questions after this, but the role of costume in all this, because I feel like you have the whole range of the dancer, performancer wearing, black, sneakers, walking around the space in casual clothes, all the way to the kind of like costume, lavish.
Yeah, I love costume.
You love costume.
I love to pick pieces, accessories. I did a piece with a towel, and I've done so many research with that towel. I like to pick like just the right object for the show. So it's something. It changes everything. I feel like it gives atmosphere when it's the right props, the right costume. So then it's the right scene.
Great. Well, let's open it up to questions since we're at our 1 hour mark.
So we are at time. It is just after 3. I don't know if folks on Zoom have anything they want to jump in with last minute, but otherwise, if Olivia and Didier are still available to stick around for a few minutes for people in the audience here at Fourth Space, you're more than welcome to raise a hand, and Kari's there with a microphone to pass it to you if you have any comments or questions. So feel free, everybody. If you're okay to stay a few extra minutes, I leave that to you. But we're okay.
Us? We're okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Boy. It's all right, it's not to me, so it's to you.
It'll be short. I think a beautiful sequence to this would be to all do it again in French, to start all over and do the whole talk in French, and see how it would shift as just part 1, and then we'd have part 2. My question is to you, Olivia, the relationship to proxemics, to the space in between people.
Yes.
And how that space within representation, in terms of how Edward T. Hall talks about it. And it seems that in every piece, that's a really crucial point. You talk about intimacy, but it's really it's also the distances and the closeness and the discomfort and how they're allowed in certain points or not, and how that echoes into the viewer. both the viewer present, but the viewer looking at it on screen, and how that sense of close and far keeps on shifting. So how do you,
You're
are
right.
you aware of that, or are you,
Not like you say it,
okay,
because you say it very well, but you're right, like in Les Tuves,
Yeah.
like the performances, how we are together without being together, without being the same, how they can be together without being the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of the way I work with the performer and actresses and actors and actresses as well. Like, we'll do this together, but we're not the same. It's not gonna be the same experience. So there's this meeting points, but there's this moment where we cannot meet as well. And maybe I have this grander desire, like to open these spaces and make them okay, like to be together or in the same room without being together or the same. And the performance Salsé was very, very educational. I learned a lot because people were aggressive sometimes because of my silence, and yeah, it's all part of the desire to create rhythm and metabolism, like, and it's another layer, I guess. Yeah.
great. And one last question. Reading an interview with Stan Douglas recently, talking about how he sees the camera as something that magnifies. Are there any words or ideas of how your camera would do? What would it do? How do you view the camera?
Yeah, I know that when I shoot something, I do that, and I'm reluctant to say I do that because it's not something I was conscious of, but I know that I have a magnifying camera, and it's very instinctive, but it's not very popular, but I'll say it anyway. I like beauty. I like beautiful images, and I think that in beautiful images, I have the possibility to say more with seductive images and beautiful images, and maybe also to show disruption in this way. But it's probably the painter in me. Yes.
And that's it.
That's it.
You can close the.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Awesome. So folks in the space and folks on Zoom, thank you so much for making it into the space today, virtual or physical. It's a beautiful sunny day outside by the looks of it. So we appreciate the time that you took to hang out here with us today. And Olivia and Didier, thank you so much for your generosity and your time, for sharing your work with us in this manner. We really appreciated it. And finally, to our colleagues at Optica who made this happen and who wanted to collaborate with ForSpace once again after that last event on March 12th, 2020. It was literally our last event before we got booted out of our space for a while. So welcome back, and we hope to work with you again very soon. I know we will. Thank